Hello everyone, I'm Julie Aker with JB Training Solutions and welcome to our webinar, Get Connected, Learning and Development Trends for the Road Ahead. If any questions come up throughout the program, simply type them in the Question and Answer tab on your control panel. Submit your questions there at any point in the program and I will make sure Brad addresses them at the end. I know we have a ton of clients and friends of JB, but for those of you who don't know Brad Karsh, he is founder and CEO of JB Training Solutions, a company dedicated to notes. As CEO, he travels the world presenting training programs to major organizations. We hope you enjoy the webinar, and here's Brad Karsh.
Thank you so much, Julie. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I am delighted to be with you today to talking about the latest trends that are happening in the world of learning and development. So this was sort of inspired by my team. They talk a lot to many of our clients, many of our friends who are saying and asking us quite a bit, like, what's going on? What are the latest trends? What are some cutting-edge companies doing? So we thought, why not put together a webinar, talk a little bit about this stuff, open it up for questions for you all, and that's what today is all about. So let's jump into it. I'm going to begin with a couple of statistics. Some of these may blow you away. They're from Deloitte's Global Human Capital Trends Study from this year. Number one, L&D exploded from the number 8 to the number 3 most important talent challenge that people who work in human capital are facing. Believe it or not, that went from 8 to 3. And when they talk to actual people working again in human capital, 85% rated learning as a very important problem. So I hate to think of it as a problem. I think of it more as an opportunity, but we do know that this is critical. We do know it's crucial. It's not just one of those, it'd be nice to do a little training that might make our people feel happy. It is absolutely critical to the success of virtually any organization. We're going to talk today about 3 things. We're going to discuss what are 4 trends in learning. We're going to take you through a quick case study and an example. It's actually one that we do here at JB, just so that you know kind of how we run our management curriculum, kind of incorporating a lot of what these trends are. And then, like I said, we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. Folks, the over-under on me getting in a word about millennials was slide number 4, and here we go. 65% of millennials say that personal development was the most influential factor in choosing a job. So learning and development was the most influential factor when they chose a job, and this is not just millennials, but 26% of employees leave their company due to a lack of learning opportunities. So again, just to reiterate, this is not a nice to do, this is a need to do. This notion of helping train our employees, helping them resonate with the job, the careers, and stuff that they have. So what are the 4 trends that we're seeing that I'm going to discuss today? Here's what they are. 1, I call it sort of the bridging, the marriage, the connecting of both formal and informal training, and we'll talk a lot about the role that informal training is playing in organizations. Bite size, you may have heard the term micro-learning. That's kind of a big buzzword right now. What that is, what it means, and what you can do about it. The notion that individuals these days crave, especially millennials, immediate feedback, and then we'll also talk about the social side of tech and how to use that to our advantage when it comes to learning and development. So the first thing I want to talk about is this notion of the marriage between formal and informal learning. So a lot of times we think about learning and development as something that we do sitting in a classroom. Certainly there is a role for that still, but think about, go ahead and chat in right now, how you learn. What are your learning activities on a typical day? Not just work-related ones, but even social or personal learning activities. Go ahead and chat in what some of those may be. How do you learn things? What are ways that you're doing it? Chat those in, and as those come in, Julie will start to read some of those aloud, and we'll see what you're saying. And then I got a couple sample ones from our constituents as well. So what are folks saying?
Reading articles on LinkedIn, Twitter, talking to experts, podcasts, Googling the topic, TED Talks, looking through archives, looking through trade magazines, on-the-job training.
Awesome. So those are pretty typical. Some of the ones that I had popped up here were, again, reading and talking. Some of you guys talked about that. I get my news headlines via Twitter when I'm standing in line at Starbucks, a little more specific than the one that you guys said, just about Twitter. As a social person, communicating with coworkers has been a major learning activity, totally true. Smartphone for whatever random question comes up at dinner. We've all been there before. Use a YouTube video when I'm cooking, or networking with and asking smart people questions. It's really interesting. Basically, these days, if you want to learn anything, there's just 3 words that you have to use to find out what you need to know, and that is just Google it, right? How many times do we just Google it? I think about, I'm an old man, as those of you who know me, right? I'm turning 50 in a couple months. I can't wait. But I remember, I'd sit around with a friend or two, and this was in my 20s, and I'd be like, so who won the 1957 World Series? And we'd get in a big fight over it, and we'd battle over it, and we'd go back and forth, and there was really no way to find that out. You could call a friend who happened to be a baseball expert, or you can go to your encyclopedia. But if you remember encyclopedias, I'm going back old school now. Hopefully some of you remember encyclopedias, right? Like, you bought them once in your life, and then you had them. So, like, in the 80s, I'd be like, oh, we can look in the encyclopedia. I'm like, the encyclopedia was from 1955, so it won't have the 1957 World Series champion. Basically, encyclopedias, the second that they came out, were immediately outdated because it took them a year to produce them. So we've gone, or I'd have to the next day hop in my car, drive to the library, find a reference librarian, see if she can get me a copy of the baseball encyclopedia, and I would see that the Milwaukee Braves won the 1957 World Series. In the time it took me to tell that story, every single person on this call could have found the last 5 World Series winners in and around 1957. We've gone from an environment where it's all about what we know to what can we find and learn, right? The information is out there. It's all out there, and it's all accessible. But it's how can we curate that information? So what we're seeing, as I said, is a little bit of a blended approach to learning that marries both the formal and the informal. Like I said, there's still classroom, but how do we reinforce that learning? How do we hit it in different places? What are different things that we do? Okay, it is on the job, so it's popping over to a coworker and asking them. It's Googling something that you're curious about. It's trying to find out on your phone, if you deal with a tough management situation, if there's a podcast or a video about it. And it's also just in time. Again, it's not enough to say like, oh, 3 weeks ago I had this workshop, right? Or 3 weeks from now I have this workshop, I'll just wait. You might need to know some of that stuff now. And again, in looking at another little survey, we're going to see what is just-in-time information, which is enabled obviously by mobile devices, by sensors, and even by humans, what people are using their cell phones for, right? At least one of the following activities: getting turn-by-turn navigation, following along to breaking news, learning about community events, getting help in an emergency situation, even public transportation information. But we're all getting this stuff just in time. And it's absolutely critical that we realize that there is this need for the just-in-time learning. It can't necessarily be, I'll wait till I'm in a management class 9 months from now to learn this stuff. And the third thing I think that's really critical that we're seeing in the space a lot of is that it's incredibly and intensely customized. Everything these days is customized. Are you interested in getting a case for your smartphone? Here's 700,000 that you can choose from, right? How about you design your own shoe? I pulled this, Beth, I know this was one of your designs for your shoe that you were recently laying out, right? You can pick your own color, your leather, your tough guy, your crinkled leather, whatever you want. Every single thing is really customized, interesting. So think about this, right? This informal learning. It's on the job, it's just in time, and it's customized. I'll have you guys do a quick chat in right now. So what types of informal learning activities are you doing at your organization? So it could be things like lunch and learns, could be things like we all watch a TED Talk together. You know, what are some informal learning activities that you're doing? We'll see what people are saying, see if we can share some ideas amongst the folks on the call today. So go ahead and chat in some of those as they start to come in. We'll see what Julie has to say.
Ideating sessions, lunch and learns, brainstorm calls, lunch and learns, informational job shadowing, PowerPoint lunch, staff meetings, casual product knowledge lessons.
Good. Great stuff. You know, and I love that idea about informational job shadowing. What a really cool way to learn about a different department, a different area. It doesn't have to necessarily even be for a job that you want, but let's say you work a lot with someone in a different capacity, spending an afternoon kind of job shadowing with them, walking the proverbial mile in their shoes. So this notion of informal, just-in-time, customized, this is sort of the blending of, if you will, the formal and the informal learning. So that's kind of point number one. We're blending these two together. The second thing we're talking about is bite-size learning, right? And there's lots of examples of that. The concept is it's short, it's digestible modules. And to me, when I think about the epitome of bite-size learning, a few of you have mentioned it already, I think of one of my favorite things, which is a TED Talk, right? It cannot be longer than 20 minutes. Can you imagine a TED Talk being viable 30 years ago? No way, right? We used to have lots of copy, lots of speeches, long stuff, but now it's digestible. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's like mini TEDs coming up soon. It's like 15 minutes is too long. People like this bite-sized learning. I remember many years ago, a couple years ago, when we were looking at doing some YouTube videos, the average attention span of a YouTube video is about 3 minutes, right? Once you get beyond 3 minutes, it's hard. Now, TED Talks are fantastic because they have great speakers on there, and that they are digestible within those 15 minutes, but short, digestible modules. All right? It's good for everybody, and it's especially good for millennials. So I'm going to ask you a question. When you think about employees that you support, the employees at your company, what % of your employees are millennials? Think about millennials as people under the age of 35, right? Under the age of 35. What % are millennials? We'll see what you have to say. The polls are open. This is a quick little poll question. Give you about 5 more seconds. You don't have to go to your employee records. This can just be a guess, folks. Don't be shy. Brittany, I think I know what your vote's going to be. Let's see what the people are saying. The polls are closed. All right, Julie, what do we have?
7% have less than 25% of millennials. 48% have between 26 and 50% millennials. 26% have between 51 and 75, and 19% have more than 75.
Wow, those are some big numbers. So the average right now is that millennials, I don't know if you heard this stat, but they just passed baby boomers as the largest constituency. But the national averages, they're still at about a third, but based on the people on this call, we have a heavy, heavy concentration of folks with lots and lots of millennials. Millennials love bite-sized learning, and a lot of it comes from a concept that they've grown up with. Again, it's millennial. It's also just young workers, but especially millennials, and I call it semester mentality. I remember I was doing my workshop a couple of years ago on working with millennials, and somebody said to me, Brad, why does it seem like millennials are so interested in doing a new job, a new activity? It's like every 4 months they want to do something different. And I turned to this person, I said, what is magical about 4 months in the mind of a millennial? And they said, aha, it's a semester. Right? It's a semester. Now, what makes this more pronounced among millennials is the fact that millennials, in addition to obviously going to the same amount of school, if you will, than we have, we all had semester mentality, but millennials have done more sports, more clubs, more activities. Their lives are packed. If you've seen my session on millennials, you know that they have 50% less free time than did Gen Xers. So they are used to every coach changing in 4 months, every activity changing in 4 months, every class changing in 4 months. If they hate their professor, they're going to change in 4 months. So they are very accustomed to that 16-week time period in which things change, which again amplifies itself when you think about this notion of bite-sized learning. So everything for them is a little bit more bite-sized than it is with other generations. And another point to kind of prove that as it relates to this bite-sized learning is this stat, which shows that millennials switch their attention between media platforms 27 times an hour, an average of every 2 minutes, which is compared to only 17 times for previous generations. They're very used to split personality. I'm looking at my phone, now I'm looking at a computer screen, now I'm looking at a TV, and I'm back to the phone, the screen, on and on and on. So bite-sized learning, smaller pieces. We know a lot of companies that are actually doing things that I'll talk a sec, like on different platforms to engage different generations, but particularly millennials. Bite-sized learning, what does it mean? Okay? So it is, as I said, mobile. We work with a company that basically sends out their employee orientation in 52 week-long tweets. So once a week, your first year, you get a new tweet from the company that tells something about something about onboarding, right? Instead of giving everybody all that information on the day one where you sit in the conference room for 8 hours and get inundated, they spread it out into bite-sized learning via mobile, via a tweet every week, once a week, and 140 characters or less, right? And the whole idea, too, is how you can kind of flex it to work. So how do you make it relevant, real, and particular to work? Like we said, if you just had a tough situation with one of your employees and you want some advice, you can't necessarily wait for the next workshop. What can you do? Who can you talk to? Where can you access that information? Okay. Now, like I said from the very beginning, we're blending the formal and the informal. This doesn't say that there isn't a role for some of that formal training, but it's how do you do it? And I'm sure you all know the 90-28 rule. If you don't, let me explain. When you're doing a workshop, right, every module, right, so every topic area should not last more than 90 minutes. There should be some kind of exercise every 20 minutes or so, and every 8 minutes you want to try and engage the audience in some way, shape, or form, the participants who are in that class. The 90-28 rule. So again, it doesn't say that you can't ever have live training, but when you do it, you want to think about it very differently. Instead of one whole day devoted to one topic, bite-size it up into smaller pieces as you go through it. That's point number 2, bite-sized learning. Point number 3, immediate feedback. I want to know how I'm doing right away. And there was one really, really easy way for all of us to get immediate feedback. And again, this is guiding a lot of what we do in training, right? We're all used to immediate feedback. Have you ever seen this button? I like it. You post something, you're like, how many likes did I get? Did I get enough likes? That was my most liked one ever. It's been an hour, I only have 12 likes. That's unacceptable. We love to get that immediate feedback. We love to know things right away. Now again, this is not necessarily all just about millennials, but there's another really important millennial point that I like to make. So as many of you know, I do an extraordinary number of workshops for both millennials and for older workers. And about a year ago, in my workshops that I was doing for millennials about how to work with older generations, somehow the topic of feedback came up. Somehow the topic of hearing from your manager. And I brought something up and I said, hey, if you don't hear from your manager about how you're doing, what do you assume about your performance? And all the millennials in my class looked at me, put a big smile on their face. They said, oh, I assume I'm doing poorly. And I was like, no, wait, maybe I misphrased that. Wait, no news is bad news, they told me. And I was like, no, my gosh, no news is good news. That's what we learned. That's what we heard. That's what we grew up with. We, meaning Gen Xers and baby boomers. Millennials have a completely different mindset on this stuff. And then I took it to other companies because I thought, well, maybe this one company's a little crazy. No. Every company I've worked with now in the last year, I've asked this question. No news is, and millennials in unison all say to me, bad news. They want immediate feedback. And to be honest, we all kind of like that now because we live in a different world, right? These are badges. They're becoming very, very popular. These are Boy Scout badges. But at the push of a button, I want to know my performance. How am I doing? What is my measures? What are my metrics? How can I turn this in some way, shape, or form into some type of even competition, right? We know some companies, we worked with a client of ours that turned every single thing that they did into a competition with winners and losers. They were okay with losers. That's all right. But they turned it into a competition. Onboarding was a competition. How quickly can you learn the stuff? How quickly can you take a quick test? How quickly can you gauge your results with other people? Okay, and it's really fascinating to look at that stuff. And of course, recognition. Now, I get a lot of pushback on this notion of recognition, and people say, again, millennials recognize too much. I think they're praised too much, but they're not necessarily recognized too much. There's a difference between praise and recognition. Recognition means thank you for doing this. Praise means you did an amazing job. So I'm a big fan of recognition, especially when it comes to learning and development. So not like, wow, you're awesome, you took that class, but thank you for getting all 6 of your badges and taking all 6 of your classes. That is awesome. That's recognition for getting some of those things done. Okay, so that's the immediate feedback. And finally, the social side of technology, right? So we know that again, millennials are very tech savvy, but there's also, if you will, a downside to being tech savvy, which is they're not as socially savvy. They've had the ability to hide behind technology through the years and through the days. And as a result, they sometimes need to make this more social. So how can you think about it? And again, companies have made this notion of technology a little bit more collaborative. So some of the things that you may do is you might be doing a training workshop and there might be an exercise, and instead of doing it on pen and paper, different groups will tweet to each other the different things that they have, or on a specific group that they have, or on their intranet. They will take this notion of social, make it collaborative, and make it part of learning and developing. I know this sounds interesting too, but having mentors or peers, another great way to learn, another social side of thinking about that role of technology. We know some relationships between mentors or peers that are done largely via social media or largely via technology. I'm also a big fan, of course, doing them in person, but it's kind of the marrying of those two. And don't forget to weave in some of those soft skills, which we said before, millennials maybe aren't as strong in when it comes to learning. So soft skills are so important for millennials. When to email, when to text, when to call, when to go in person to see people, how to deal with difficult folks. All these are types of things that are becoming new, interesting ways that people are learning and thinking and developing. A great quote, we don't merely want to teach people, we want to inspire them to learn. All right, so no matter what happens, no matter what you do, this has always been the same in the old school of learning and the new school of learning. Okay? The idea that learning needs to connect emotionally with the learner, inspire action, be transformational, and encourage accountability. What I'm suggesting in this first part of what we just talked about is that there's ways to do it the traditional way, and there's ways to also marry it to a little bit some of the newer things that we're seeing in the world of learning and development. So just a quick little poll question now. How do you think you're doing as it relates to some of these newest trends in L&D? The polls are open, and we will not attribute this to anybody individually. So this is an independent exercise. It is completely anonymous. How are you doing? Are you excellent? Are you fair? Or are you, yikes, this is all new news to me, which is good. That's why you're on the call. So the polls will close in 3 seconds. Let's see what the people have to say. What do you think, Julie?
7% said excellent, we are on it. 79% said fair, we need some changes. 14% said yikes. The first step is awareness.
It's always good to start, so let's talk about what we can do about it. So what I want to do right now is talk about a little quick case study and an example. And in fairness, this is a JB Training Solutions example, but I think it's an interesting way. This is some of the things that we're doing for our clients, but I think it brings together a lot of things that we talked about, and you'll see it kind of come to life in a different way. So just as a little bit of backdrop, basically the way that we do management training is we have 2 different programs. We have a Management 101, for folks who are first-time managers that talks about these 5 different things. We conduct these as kind of a full-day class. We also have kind of the next level of management, which is for mid-level managers that talks about some of these things as well. Many clients that we work with still will do these as a full-day workshop, which is a great way to get some of that stuff across. But what we've done is we've taken some of the things I just talked about with you earlier, and we've talked about a blended approach. So one of our goals is to have monthly touch points on this learning, and I'll show you how we do it. There's really 3 phases, okay? You've got the engage phase, which is the pre-phase. So they might pre-read a short article, they might watch a TED Talk, they might read something to help get them excited and psyched for the training. Then we might lead it, or the hallmark of it is still going to be an instructor-led, targeted, dynamic live workshop, but then we're going to reinforce the learning, and this is where I think it gets most interesting with things like webinars, huddles, challenges. This is where we blend the learning. By the way, everything I'm showing you right now are things that you can do on your own as well. So take notes. This is stuff you can institute at your company. You don't necessarily need someone from the outside to do it. You can do it all yourself. This blended learning approach, these monthly touch points, they don't just come from like, hey, it'd be great to do it every month. They come from a little bit of science. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. Or you're like, oh, shoot, I just forgot it. I know I learned it a little while ago. But what you're seeing in numbers there is the % retention. And if you jump ahead to 31 days, you can see that we forget about 80% of what we learned after 31 days, which is really, really scary. By the way, for me, I forget about 80% of what I learned in about a week. But I'm trying to get better at it. So we try to have these monthly touch points. So we do it as either a 6-month or a year-long curriculum. We have 4 live workshops, we have 2 webinars, we have 4 team huddles, and we have monthly challenges. And I'll show you how we do each of these things. And again, you can do all this stuff on your own. So 1, like I said, we do the engage, the prerequisites. Maybe they're listening to a TED Talk. They could be reading a Harvard Business Review article. We might send out little teasers, video teasers or email teasers to get them excited. We might have them take a quick little survey. There's these things called tiny pulses, or I'm sure you've all heard of Survey Monkeys, where you can find out what issues they're facing, let's say, on management. What are the 3 things you're worried most about when it comes to being a manager, so that we know we're addressing the right stuff. Then, and these aren't in a row, but we'll teach. So we'll take what was that full-day workshop. I told you there were 2 different full-day workshops, and we break it into 4 different half-day workshops, so that we're not doing as long of a training, a full training. We're hitting them a little bit more frequently. Okay, and you see the topics that we hit. Then we reinforce it with a couple live webinars. All right, we do these via GoToWebinar, just like we're doing now. We do one on meeting management. We do one on leading through sticky scenarios. Okay, those are the live training stuff, either in person or via webinar. So there's really 6 of those over the course of the 6 months or a year. And then we reinforce it. Now, I love this one the most. And again, you guys can do all this stuff on your own. So we love to put people together. Make them, we call them sometimes accountability teams. We get a group of 4 or 6 people. So if we have a live workshop that has 24 people, we will break everyone in the live workshop into 1 of 4 groups. So there's 4 groups of 6 people. These are their peers. And they are tasked with having team huddles, right? And here's some of the topics. So we might say, hey, one of the things we talked about was having a crucial conversation. What I want you to do now is all go back and have a crucial conversation with someone on your team. Then when you get together, so this is not led by JB Training or even you guys, when they get together, the 6 of them, they talk more about how those went. They're responsible and accountable to each other. Millennials, again, everyone does, but millennials especially love working in teams. They love that group accountability. This is some of the social side that we talked about. And there are 4 topics that we hit them with, again, roughly all within the 6-month to 1-month period. And then finally, we have them do some things on their own to, again, hit them one more time, and that's what we call personal challenges. So we might say, write 3 thank you notes to your direct reports on things that they did that are excellent. We give them periodic ones of these. Hold a critical conversation or delegate a new responsibility. We talked how important delegation was. Your personal challenges in the next 2 weeks, you have to delegate a responsibility. These are written topics that they get to pull it all together. A typical calendar might look like this over the course of, let's say, 3 months, right? Everything in green is a personal challenge. Everything in blue is a team huddle. They get a webinar and workshop. And you see what happens is they're getting hit 2 or 3 times a month with some of this learning. It's not intense all-day stuff. It might be an hour here. It might be 2 hours here. It might be, occasionally that live workshop. But it reinforces that learning. It's bite-sized learning. It's social in terms of how they execute it. It blends the formal and the informal, and it really gives them some immediate feedback on how they're doing things. It hits all those main topics we talked about in terms of how critical they are. So to quickly sum up, we talked about the merging of the formal and the informal, right? From the TED Talk to the formal training program. We talked about making it bite-sized, micro-learning. Could you literally once a week for a year tweet out learning as it relates to onboarding? We talked about immediate feedback, getting those badges, doing that competition, letting them know how they're doing and getting recognized for it. And then finally, we talked about the social side of tech and how it plays into learning and development. Folks, we covered a lot of information, but I always love to make sure that I leave time for questions. So if anybody on this call has questions, at this point, feel free to chat some of those in. I can share with you the latest and greatest that I'm hearing out there throughout my travels and through all the work that we do in research here at JB Training Solutions. I do want you to chat in questions. While you're thinking about your questions, I also want to remind you of another free event that we have. Now, this is going to be in Chicago, so you kind of have to be in Chicago or have a really big travel budget. But on Friday, September 18th, I'm going to do a quick little 1-hour program on the good, the bad, and the ugly, giving and receiving feedback. We network from 8 to 8:30, and then the program's from 8:30 to 9:30 in Chicago, Illinois. You could check it out on our website. But, Julie, are any questions coming in? Let's hear what the people have to say.
What are some ideas for making sure attendees do the prerequisites? I don't want to call them out and make them feel uncomfortable, but also want to make sure they complete the tasks assigned?
No, that's a great question, and you'll never get 100% compliance unless you quiz people on it, and that's a little bit too totalitarian these days. I think if you make it fun, I think if you make it short, and I think if you make it interesting, they're actually quite likely to go ahead and do it. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Also, usually they're fairly vested in the work. We make it quick, short, and fun. So I think it's going to you'll get pretty decent compliance.
How open are people across the generations regarding the peer team huddles?
You know, I've found that there's pretty good success, not just with millennials, but with other generations too. And, you know, one of the things I always say that is interesting about training is, and I've done sessions for really, really senior people, so where it's, you know, mostly baby boomers, a handful of Gen Xers. Just getting those people in the room talking with each other, forget the topic of what I'm discussing or you're discussing. Just doing that has extraordinary value. And I find that when they are beholden to each other, regardless of their age, when they feel a commitment that they kind of generated in that live workshop, and when they all work, if you will, at the same company, they actually enjoy this. It's kind of a little bit of break from work. It's getting to talk to their peers. They can share common issues that they're having. So if they're senior managers, like, oh my God, how are you dealing with this, or how are you dealing with that? I find that they actually really, really like it when it comes to those peer types of environments.
Do you recommend certain trainings for soft skills?
Yes, absolutely. So there's certain things that we find that companies are doing most when it comes to soft skills. So one I would say is management, right? Obviously, if you consider that a soft skill. Or I don't like that word soft skill. I worked with a client who called them power skills. Kind of like power skills better. So a power skill, management is a huge one. Obviously, generations is a huge one that we're doing a lot of. And then the other area that we do a lot of work in that I would recommend highly is communication and presentation skills. Some companies where you present a lot, it's absolutely critical, but for those where you're not presenting, just the ability to communicate effectively is really, really important. And that topic of feedback, which kind of falls under management. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope you picked up a few things. I hope you learned a little bit during this mini webinar. If you have additional questions, thoughts, or comments, you know where to reach me. Have an amazing day, and thanks again for your time. Bye-bye.